I reject you. Derek Voss's voice sliced through the moon hall so sharply that even the musicians stopped playing. Elena Hartwell felt every eye in the room land on her at once. Hundreds of wolves stood beneath towering silver chandeliers, their jeweled clothes glittering under the pale blue firelight. Yet suddenly the massive hall felt unbearably small. Her lungs tightened. Heat crawled up her neck as whispers spread through the crowd like sparks through dry grass. Derek stood in front of her in ceremonial black, tall and handsome beside the ancient altar stone, his expression twisted with open disgust. You honestly believed I would accept a weak Omega as my mate? He asked loudly. A few people laughed. Others looked away in secondhand embarrassment. Elena's fingers trembled around the edge of her silver gown. The dress had belonged to her mother once. She had spent 3 nights repairing the tiny tears by candlelight because it was the only beautiful thing she owned. Derek, she whispered, humiliation burning through her chest. Please, please. His cruel smile widened. That's exactly the problem. You beg. You apologize. You shrink every time someone speaks to you. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel sharper. No alpha wants a mate who looks terrified of her own shadow. More laughter echoed across the hall. Elena felt her wolf curl inward in pain. The mate bond that had flickered weakly between them for weeks snapped apart like brittle thread. Her knees nearly gave out from the force of it. She grabbed the edge of the marble table to steady herself while music, conversation, even breathing around her blurred together into a distant roar. Somewhere near the back of the hall, a woman muttered, "Pathetic." Another voice answered, "She should have known he'd never choose her." Elena lowered her eyes fast, trying not to cry in front of them. That was the worst part. Not the rejection itself. The audience. The way they watched her suffering like entertainment during the winter mating ceremony. Derek turned away from her casually, already reaching for the hand of a beautiful beta female standing nearby. The woman smiled smugly as she slid against his arm. A future Luna should inspire strength, Derek announced proudly to the crowd. Not pity. Applause broke out this time. Real applause. Elena's stomach twisted so violently, she thought she might collapse right there on the polished marble floor. She took a shaky step backward. Then another. All she wanted was to disappear. The towering doors of Moon Hall suddenly felt impossibly far away. Her breathing turned uneven as she moved through the sea of glittering gowns and dark suits. No one stopped her. A few wolves smirked openly as she passed. Someone deliberately bumped her shoulder hard enough to spill dark red wine across the front of her silver dress. Gasps rippled outward. Elena froze. Crimson liquid soaked through the delicate fabric, dripping slowly onto the white marble beneath her feet. Oops, the woman said flatly without sounding sorry at all. Quiet laughter followed. Elena stared at the stain spreading across her mother's gown. Something inside her cracked softly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to hurt. She swallowed hard, blinking against the tears gathering in her eyes. Before we continue, where are you watching from? The announcer's cheerful voice echoed magically from floating crystal speakers high above the hall. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us love finds the broken. The magical projection flickered away as quickly as it appeared, but Elena barely heard it. Her heartbeat thundered too loudly in her ears now. She turned toward the massive entrance doors again, desperate to escape the crushing humiliation pressing against her chest. Then every torch in Moon Hall went out at once. Darkness swallowed the celebration instantly. A shocked murmur spread through the crowd. The chandeliers overhead flickered violently before dying one by one until only moonlight poured through the enormous stained glass windows. Cold silence settled over the room. Elena stopped breathing. Slow footsteps echoed from beyond the entrance. Heavy, controlled, powerful enough that each step seemed to vibrate through the marble. Beneath everyone's feet, the giant doors creaked open. Winter air swept inside, carrying the scent of snow, cedarwood, and something ancient enough to make every wolf instinctively lower their head. Elena looked up slowly. A tall man dressed entirely in black stood beneath the moonlight at the entrance of the hall. His broad shoulders nearly filled the doorway. Silver eyes scanned the room once before stopping directly on her. Not on Derek. Not on the crowd. Her. The entire hall went silent in terror. Then someone whispered the name that made every heartbeat in the room stumble. The king of all alphas. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Elena stood in the center of Moon Hall with wine soaking through her ruined silver dress, while the most feared man in the kingdom stared directly at her from the entrance. King Lucian Draven looked unreal beneath the moonlight pouring through the open doors behind him. His black coat brushed the marble floor with every slow step forward. Silver embroidery glimmered faintly across the heavy fabric like threads of frost. The air around him carried the cold scent of winter forests after snowfall, sharp and clean enough to cut through the perfume and smoke filling the hall. Wolves lowered their heads instinctively as he passed. Some dropped to one knee without being told. Others looked physically uncomfortable under the crushing pressure of his presence. Elena had heard stories about the king of all alphas since childhood. Everyone had. They whispered that entire packs went silent when he entered a room. They claimed his wolf was larger than any living creature in the Northern Territories. Some even believed the moon itself favored him. But none of those stories prepared her for this. Lucian stopped several feet away from her. The hall remained completely silent except for the soft crackling of dying torch flames. Derek Voss swallowed hard near the altar platform, suddenly looking far less confident than he had moments earlier. "Your Majesty," Derek said quickly, forcing a nervous smile. "We did not expect a royal visit tonight." Lucian did not answer him. His gaze remained fixed on Elena. She became painfully aware of every detail about herself all at once. The wine stain spreading across her dress, her shaking hands, the humiliation still burning hot across her face. She wanted to disappear beneath the marble floor. Instead, those silver eyes studied her with a strange intensity that made her pulse stumble. Not disgust, not pity, something far more dangerous. Recognition. Elena dropped her eyes immediately. "I apologize if I have caused trouble," she whispered softly. A faint murmur spread through the crowd. Nobody expected an Omega to speak directly to the king. Lucian finally moved again. One step closer. The room seemed to tense with him. "Look at me," he said quietly. His voice was deep and calm, yet impossible to ignore. Elena hesitated before slowly lifting her eyes. The moment their gazes met, something inside her chest tightened painfully. Heat spread beneath her skin in a way she did not understand. Lucian's expression shifted almost invisibly. His jaw hardened. His wolf was close now. She could feel it pressing against the edges of the room like a storm waiting to break. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena Hartwell, Your Majesty." Her voice nearly failed on the last word. Lucian repeated her name slowly, as though testing how it sounded. "Elena." The simple way he said it sent another strange warmth through her chest. Derek stepped forward quickly, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "She is nobody important," he interrupted with an uneasy laugh. "Only a rejected Omega from my territory." Lucian's eyes finally shifted toward him. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Derek stiffened under the weight of that stare. "Rejected?" Lucian asked softly. No one missed the warning hidden beneath the calm tone. Derek cleared his throat. The mating bond was weak. "She is not fit to stand beside an alpha leader." A few wolves nodded carefully from the edges of the crowd, though none sounded eager to agree aloud anymore. Lucian looked back toward Elena. His eyes drifted to the wine soaking through her silver gown, then lower to the trembling fingers she kept clenched at her sides. Slowly, deliberately, he removed the heavy black cloak from his shoulders. Gasps rippled across the hall. Royal wolves never removed their cloaks in public unless making a declaration of trust or protection. Elena froze as Lucian stepped closer and draped the warm fabric gently around her shoulders. The thick material swallowed her small frame instantly, carrying his scent with it. Cedarwood. Snow. Smoke from distant winter fires. Safe. The word appeared in her mind, so suddenly it almost frightened her. "No one wearing my colors should stand ashamed," Lucian said quietly. The silence that followed felt enormous. Derek's face paled. Elena stared up at the king in complete confusion. "Your Majesty," she whispered. Lucian lowered his head slightly toward her, speaking softly enough that only she could hear the next words. "Who taught you to stand there like you deserve cruelty?" Her breath caught painfully in her throat, because no one had ever asked her that before, not once in her entire life. Elena could not speak. The warmth of Lucien's cloak rested across her shoulders like something unreal, far too heavy with meaning for her to understand. Around them, Moon Hall remained frozen in stunned silence. No one dared whisper now. No one dared laugh. The same wolves who had mocked her minutes ago suddenly avoided looking directly at her, as though standing too close to the king's attention had become dangerous. Elena's pulse refused to slow. She could still hear Lucien's quiet question echoing in her mind. Who taught you to stand there like you deserve cruelty? The answer felt painfully simple. Everyone. Derek took a careful step down from the altar platform, forcing confidence back into his expression. Your Majesty, he began cautiously. Surely there has been some misunderstanding. Elena is emotional tonight. Rejection ceremonies can be difficult for weaker wolves. Lucien did not even glance at him. That somehow felt worse. Derek's jaw tightened. She has no standing, he continued. No influence. No useful bloodline. My decision was made for the good of the pack. Elena flinched slightly at the words. Even now, after everything, hearing him dismiss her so easily still hurt. Lucien noticed. His silver eyes shifted toward her instantly, sharp enough to catch even the smallest reaction. Do his words still matter to you? He asked quietly. Elena swallowed hard. I spent years hoping they would not, she admitted softly. Something dark flickered behind Lucien's expression before disappearing again. The king straightened slowly to his full height, towering over nearly everyone in the hall. Interesting, he murmured. Derek forced out a tense laugh. With respect, Your Majesty, you arrived in the middle of a private pact ceremony. Elena's rejection changes nothing important. That finally made Lucien look at him fully. The pressure in the room deepened so suddenly that several wolves lowered their heads again instinctively. Even the chandeliers overhead seemed dimmer somehow beneath the weight of the king's attention. Nothing important? Lucien repeated calmly. Derek hesitated. She is only an Omega. The words barely left his mouth before a low growl rolled through Moon Hall. It did not sound entirely human. The deep vibration seemed to shake through the marble floor itself, rattling glasses across nearby tables. Fear flashed across several faces immediately. Elena's breath caught. Lucien's wolf was close now. Very close. Yet while the room trembled beneath that terrifying sound, Lucien himself remained perfectly still. Controlled. Calm. That almost made it worse. Only, Lucien said softly. Tell me, Derek Voss, when did your pack begin teaching that kindness is weakness? Derek's face flushed red. That is not what I meant. No. Lucien took one slow step toward him. Then explain. Derek glanced around the hall desperately, clearly hoping someone would support him. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The king's presence crushed every ounce of courage from the room. Elena stood motionless beside the royal table, Lucien's cloak wrapped tightly around her trembling frame. For the first time all night, she realized something strange. She no longer felt alone. The realization scared her almost as much as the king himself. A nervous older elder finally cleared his throat from near the back of the hall. Your Majesty, he said carefully. Perhaps emotions have simply run high. Tonight, young wolves can be unkind during mating season. Lucien's gaze slid toward the elder. And older wolves permit it. The elder immediately lowered his head in shame. Silence returned once more. Elena noticed several servants quietly staring at her now with completely different expressions than before. Not mockery anymore. Curiosity. Confusion. One young Omega near the wall even looked hopeful, as though seeing someone stand beside Elena had changed something inside her too. Derek noticed it as well. Panic crept visibly into his face. He stepped forward again before the shifting mood could spread further. Your Majesty, he said quickly, if Elena has somehow entertained you tonight, then by all means, enjoy her company. But she is not suited for royal attention. She is fragile. Elena stiffened at the word. Fragile. Derek had called her that for years. Every time she spoke too softly. Every time she chose peace instead of cruelty. Every time she cared too much. Lucien looked back toward her slowly. Fragile. His voice lowered dangerously. Elena opened her mouth to answer before she could stop herself. I am trying not to become hard, she whispered. The entire hall went silent again. Lucien stared at her for several long seconds. Then something in his expression changed completely. Not anger this time. Not coldness. Respect. Genuine respect. That, he said quietly, is the strongest thing I have heard tonight. Elena's breath caught. Nobody had ever called her strong before. Not once. The silence after Lucien's words felt almost sacred. Elena stood frozen beneath the soft blue moonlight spilling through the stained glass windows while hundreds of wolves stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. Strong. The word echoed painfully inside her chest because she had spent her entire life hearing the opposite. Weak Omega. Burden. Too soft. Too emotional. Too small for this world. Yet somehow the most powerful alpha alive had looked directly at her and seen strength instead. Elena did not know what to do with that. Derek clearly did not know either. His face tightened with barely controlled frustration as the mood inside Moon Hall shifted further. Away from him. The admiration and approval he usually commanded had vanished completely beneath Lucien's presence. "Your Majesty," Derek said carefully, trying once more to regain control. "You are honoring her with kindness she has not earned." Lucien's expression cooled instantly. "Earned," he repeated softly. Derek nodded quickly, sensing too late that he had chosen the wrong word. An Omega must prove value to her pack. Elena has never contributed anything meaningful. She avoids conflict. She spends more time tending wounded servants and stray pups than learning proper leadership. A few nervous laughs flickered weakly through the hall before dying almost immediately. Elena lowered her eyes. Part of her hated that Derek's words still hurt after all these years. Because he was right about one thing. She had never been what her pack wanted. While others trained for dominance and political alliances, Elena quietly helped injured workers in the kitchens. She repaired clothing for elderly wolves who could no longer sew properly. She sat beside frightened children during winter storms because she knew what fear felt like. Small things. Soft things. Things nobody valued. Lucien watched her carefully, as though reading every emotion crossing her face. Then suddenly a sharp crash shattered the silence. A young servant stumbled near one of the banquet tables, dropping a silver tray loaded with crystal goblets onto the marble floor. Glass scattered everywhere. The frightened servant immediately fell to her knees, trembling violently. "I am sorry," she whispered desperately. "I am so sorry." Elena recognized the girl instantly. Clara, barely 16, new to the hall staff, terrified of making mistakes. One of the shattered crystal pieces had sliced across Clara's palm. Blood welled quickly between her shaking fingers. Before anyone else could react, Elena moved. She crossed the marble floor instinctively, Lucien's black cloak flowing behind her shoulders. "Do not touch the glass," she told Clara gently while kneeling beside her. The girl's breathing was uneven with panic. "You are okay. Look at me." Slow breaths. Clara tried to apologize again, tears filling her eyes. Elena carefully took the girl's injured hand into her own. Warmth spread through Elena's chest immediately. Familiar. Strange. Ancient. It always happened when someone was hurting. Since childhood, pain around her had felt almost impossible to ignore. Sometimes emotions hit her so strongly they felt physical. Fear, grief, loneliness. She could sense them all. Usually she hid that part of herself because wolves considered it weakness. Tonight she forgot to hide. Soft golden light flickered faintly beneath her fingertips. Tiny at first, barely visible, then brighter. Several wolves gasped. Clara stared down at her own hand in shock as the bleeding slowed almost instantly. The deep fear in her expression softened into confusion. Elena froze. She had not meant for anyone to see that. Whispering spread rapidly through Moon Hall. "Did you see that? That was moonlight healing. No Omega can do that." Derek's face drained of color. Lucien remained perfectly still, but his eyes sharpened with dangerous focus. Elena quickly released Clara's hand, panic rising inside her chest. "I am sorry," she whispered automatically, stepping backward. "I did not mean. Do not apologize." Lucien's voice cut through the room immediately. Elena looked up. The king had not taken his eyes off her. Not once. Slowly, he descended the short marble steps from the royal platform. Every movement felt deliberate, controlled, predatory in the quietest possible way. Wolves parted instantly to clear a path for him. Lucien stopped directly in front of Elena. She realized then just how small she looked compared to him. His broad frame blocked the moonlight entirely, surrounding her in shadow and cedarwood warmth. Yet despite the overwhelming power radiating from him, his next words came softly. "How long have you hidden this?" Elena's throat tightened. I do not know what you mean. A faint sadness crossed Lucian's expression. Yes, he murmured quietly. You do. Before Elena could answer, one of the oldest elders in the hall suddenly stood so fast his chair nearly toppled behind him. The elderly wolf stared at Elena with visible shock, his hands trembling against the edge of the table. Those eyes, he whispered hoarsely. The moonlight in her blood, his face turned pale. It cannot be possible. The old elder could not seem to stop staring at Elena. His weathered face had gone completely pale beneath the golden chandeliers, his breathing uneven as though he had seen a ghost rise from the dead. Wolves throughout Moon Hall exchanged nervous looks while whispers spread faster than before. Elena felt panic curl tightly in her stomach. She hated attention, hated the way everyone suddenly looked at her now with fear instead of mockery. Somehow that felt worse. Elder Marcus. Derek snapped impatiently, trying to break the strange tension swallowing the room. What are you talking about? The old wolf swallowed hard before answering. The Moonborn, he whispered. Silence crashed down instantly. Even the musicians near the back wall stiffened in shock. Elena frowned softly. She had never heard the word before. But Lucian had. She saw it immediately in the sudden stillness of his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. Deep and dangerous. Derek let out a short laugh, though it sounded forced. That bloodline disappeared centuries ago, he said quickly. Everyone knows the stories are myths. Elder Marcus slowly shook his head without taking his eyes off Elena. The legend spoke of silver healing beneath moonlight, he murmured. Eyes that reflect emotion before power. Wolves born with hearts too gentle for cruelty. Elena instinctively stepped backward. Every word made the room feel tighter around her. You are mistaken, she whispered softly. I am nobody special. Lucian finally spoke again. That, he said quietly, is exactly why nobody noticed. His silver gaze moved across the crowd slowly. You looked for dominance, for ambition, for violence. Shame flickered across several faces immediately. Lucian turned back toward Elena. Meanwhile, she spent years protecting others quietly, while this pack mistook compassion for weakness. Derek's jaw clenched visibly. Your Majesty, with respect, this is becoming absurd. She is an Omega from a minor bloodline. Nothing more. Lucian's eyes darkened slightly. And yet your entire hall felt her power the moment she touched that girl. Nobody argued with him because nobody could. Elena still remembered the warmth in Clara's injured hand. The strange golden light. The way the entire room had reacted in shock. Fear pressed harder against her ribs now. I never wanted attention, she admitted quietly. I only wanted to help. Lucian looked at her for several long seconds. His expression softened in a way that made the room even more uneasy somehow. The king of all alphas was feared because he was ruthless, cold, untouchable. Yet standing beside Elena, his voice lowered with impossible care. That is why the moon chose you. Her breath caught sharply. Chosen, she whispered. Before Lucian could answer, Derek suddenly stepped forward again. Desperation had begun replacing arrogance in his expression. Enough, he said firmly. This entire ceremony has lost control. He forced a smile toward the surrounding wolves. Surely nobody truly believes some forgotten fairy tale bloodline has suddenly appeared in my pack tonight. A few uneasy wolves nodded, grateful for anything that sounded normal again. Derek noticed immediately and pushed harder. Elena has always been emotional, he continued. Sensitive wolves sometimes display unusual empathy during stress. That does not make her special. Elena lowered her eyes again. Part of her wanted to believe him because the alternative felt terrifying. Lucian noticed her uncertainty instantly. He stepped closer until she could feel warmth radiating from him beneath the heavy black coat. Look at me, he said quietly. She obeyed before realizing it. Lucian reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away if she wished. His fingers stopped just beneath her chin, barely touching her skin. The entire hall watched in complete silence. Do you feel that? He asked softly. Elena froze. Heat spread beneath her skin again the moment he touched her. Not painful, not frightening. Ancient, like moonlight sinking into her bones. Her pulse stumbled violently. Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly as though confirming something only he could sense. Then the chandeliers overhead flickered. Silver light suddenly rippled across the marble floor beneath. Elena's feet in thin glowing patterns that looked almost alive. Gasps erupted throughout the hall. Several wolves stumbled backward in fear. Elder Marcus nearly dropped to his knees. Moon marks, he whispered shakily. By the goddess. Elena stared downward in horror at the glowing symbols circling her feet. What is happening to me? Lucien's gaze never left her face. Nothing is happening to you, he said quietly. Something is waking up. Derek looked genuinely frightened now. This is impossible, he muttered. Lucien finally turned toward him again, calm but terrifyingly certain. No, the king replied softly. The impossible part is that your pack spent years convincing a future queen she was worthless. The glowing symbols beneath Elena's feet slowly pulsed, like living silver beneath the marble floor. Every wolf in Moon Hall stared at her with stunned disbelief, while fear crept through the crowd in restless waves. Elena could barely breathe. She felt exposed in a way she never had before, as though the entire room could suddenly see every hidden part of her she had spent years trying to bury. Weakness, loneliness, hope. Lucien stood directly beside her, impossibly calm while chaos quietly spread around them. The silver markings reflected faintly in his eyes as he watched her with steady focus. Not fear. Never fear. Your Majesty, Elder Marcus said shakily. If she truly carries Moonborn blood, then the old prophecies were never myths, Lucien finished quietly. Derek's composure finally began cracking completely. No, he snapped sharply. I refuse to believe this. He stepped closer, glaring at Elena as though somehow this were her fault. She has lived here her entire life. She has no power, no status, no training. She cannot suddenly become important because lights appeared on the floor. Elena flinched at the bitterness in his voice. Lucien noticed instantly. His expression hardened with visible warning. Derek ignored it. Fear had turned into anger now. You all treated her like she was fragile because she is fragile, he continued loudly. She cannot even defend herself during a simple rejection ceremony. The room fell painfully quiet again. Elena hated how every cruel word still reached inside her chest so easily. Years of humiliation did not disappear in a single night, no matter what magic glowed beneath her feet. Derek looked around the hall desperately, searching for support. Are we truly supposed to believe she belongs beside the king of all alphas? Several wolves avoided answering. Others looked uncertain. The old pack instincts of hierarchy and power were fighting against everything they had witnessed tonight. Lucien finally moved. Slowly, he stepped away from Elena and faced the center of the hall fully. The movement alone commanded immediate silence. You are correct about one thing, Derek Voss, he said calmly. Derek looked relieved for half a second. Then Lucien continued. Elena does not belong beneath wolves who mistake cruelty for strength. The relief vanished instantly. Lucien's voice remained quiet, yet every word carried absolute authority. For centuries, the Moonborn line was honored because they possessed what most alphas lacked. Compassion without weakness. Loyalty without fear. Power guided by mercy instead of pride. His silver eyes swept slowly across the room. The kingdom nearly destroyed itself after they disappeared. Elder Marcus lowered his head heavily, shame filling his weathered face. We forgot, the elder whispered. No, Lucien corrected softly. You abandoned those values because domination was easier. Elena stared at him in stunned silence. Nobody had ever spoken about kindness as though it carried power before. Especially not an alpha king. Derek clenched his jaw tightly. Even if she carries ancient blood, that changes nothing about tonight. I already rejected the bond. Lucien looked at him with terrifying stillness. Yes, he said quietly. You did. Something dangerous flickered beneath the king's calm expression then. Not rage exactly. Finality. And because of that, Lucien continued, you no longer have any claim over her future. Derek stiffened. Claim. The room seemed to tighten around the word. Elena's pulse quickened painfully. Lucien turned toward her again. Moonlight spilled across his dark clothing, while silver patterns still glowed softly. Beneath Elena's feet, like stars reflected on water. Elena Hartwell, he said gently. For years you were taught to apologize for the very things the moon blessed within you. She could not look away from him. Your kindness was called weakness. Your empathy was called fragility. Your heart was treated like a flaw. Lucien stepped closer again, his presence surrounding her completely. Yet his voice remained impossibly soft. I do not see weakness when I look at you. Her throat tightened instantly. Emotion burned behind her eyes before she could stop it. Nobody had ever defended her like this. Nobody had ever looked at her like she mattered. The glowing symbols beneath her feet suddenly brightened again, pulsing stronger with every heartbeat. Gasps spread throughout the hall. Lucien's gaze darkened with certainty. Then, before anyone could speak another word, the king of all alphas lowered himself onto one knee in front of her. The entire hall froze in complete shock. No ruler had knelt before another wolf in over 100 years. Elena stared down at him in disbelief while his silver eyes held hers steadily. "You were rejected tonight," Lucien said quietly. "Then allow me to correct the greatest mistake this pack has ever made." His hand rose slowly toward hers. "Elena Hartwell," he said softly enough that the entire silent hall leaned closer to hear. "I would like to claim you as my equal." The world seemed to stop moving. Elena could only stare at Lucien kneeling before her beneath the pale silver glow covering Moon Hall. The king of all alphas remained perfectly still, one hand extended toward her while hundreds of wolves stood frozen in complete disbelief around them. Nobody spoke. Nobody even dared breathe too loudly. A king did not kneel. Not for alliances. Not for politics. Certainly not for a rejected Omega covered in spilled wine and shaking beneath borrowed black fabric. Yet Lucien looked at her as though she were the only thing in the room that mattered. Elena's heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Your Majesty," she whispered weakly. Lucien's expression softened almost invisibly. "Lucien," he corrected gently. The simple sound of his name on her lips felt strangely dangerous. Derek finally snapped. "This is insane." His voice cracked sharply through the hall, breaking the stunned silence. "You cannot seriously mean this." Lucien did not even look away from Elena. "I rarely speak without meaning what I say." Derek stepped forward in disbelief. "She is an Omega from a forgotten pack." "She is Moonborn," Elder Marcus interrupted hoarsely. The old wolf still looked shaken to his core. "And perhaps the first true Moonborn seen in generations." Derek turned toward him furiously. "You are basing this madness on glowing symbols and old legends." "No," Marcus whispered. "I am basing it on the fact that the king crossed half the kingdom the moment her power awakened." Silence hit the room again. Elena's eyes widened slowly. She looked down at Lucien in confusion. "You knew?" Lucien rose smoothly to his feet, towering before her once more. "Not your name," he admitted quietly. "Not your face." His silver eyes remained locked on hers. "But for months I felt something changing." Elena frowned softly. Lucien glanced briefly toward the moonlit windows high above the hall. The old magic tied to the throne began waking again after years of silence. Wolves born from the first moon line were meant to balance the strength of alpha kings. Compassion beside power. Mercy beside authority. His gaze returned to her. "Then tonight, I felt you." Her breath caught painfully. "That is impossible." "So is healing beneath moonlight," Lucien replied softly. Elena looked down at her trembling hands. Part of her still wanted to deny all of this. She had spent years surviving quietly by making herself smaller. Smaller dreams. Smaller voice. Smaller existence. Becoming invisible had kept her safe. But now every eye in the room followed her every movement. Fear tightened around her ribs again. "I do not know how to be what everyone suddenly thinks I am," she admitted honestly. Lucien stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that it felt personal despite the crowded hall surrounding them. "Good." Elena blinked in surprise. Lucien's expression softened again in that impossible way that only seemed to exist when he looked at her. "The wolves who hunger for power usually should not possess it." A faint murmur spread through the room. Derek looked seconds away from exploding with frustration. "You cannot simply walk into my territory and take my former mate because you suddenly find her interesting." Lucien finally turned toward him fully. The warmth vanished instantly from his face. "Former mate," he repeated calmly. Derek hesitated under the terrifying stillness in Lucien's eyes. "You publicly rejected her," Lucien continued softly. "You humiliated her before your entire pack." Every word felt colder now, sharper. "And now that others see value in her, suddenly you object?" Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out immediately. The room had already turned against him. Elena could feel it. Wolves who once laughed at her now watched Derek with visible discomfort. Even the beautiful beta female still standing beside the altar had quietly stepped away from him. Lucian looked back at Elena again, his voice immediately gentler. You are not property to be claimed or discarded based on another wolf's convenience. Something inside Elena cracked open painfully at those words. Because deep down, part of her had always believed exactly that. Disposable. Easy to reject. Easy to ignore. Lucian slowly lifted one hand toward her face again, careful enough to give her time to pull away. She did not. His fingertips brushed lightly against a tear she had not realized escaped down her cheek. You deserve choice, he said quietly. The glowing moon symbols beneath Elena's feet brightened once more at his touch. Soft silver light climbed higher across the marble floor now, winding around both of them like living starlight. Gasps spread through the hall again. Elder Marcus looked close to tears himself. The bond, he whispered shakily. The old bond has awakened. Elena stared up at Lucian helplessly while moonlight shimmered in his silver eyes. Then, for the first time all night, she saw something unexpected beneath all his terrifying power. Loneliness. Ancient and heavy, as though he had spent years carrying a kingdom alone. Lucian saw the moment she noticed. His expression shifted slightly, almost vulnerable for a single heartbeat. You are not the only one who has been alone for a very long time, he admitted softly. Elena could not stop looking at him after those words. The king of all alphas stood surrounded by silver moonlight, feared by every wolf in the kingdom, yet for one quiet moment he looked unbearably tired. Not weak, never weak, just alone in a way she understood too well. The realization settled painfully inside her chest. All her life, Elena had believed powerful wolves lived without fear or loneliness. But Lucian's eyes carried years of isolation behind all that strength. It made him feel suddenly real instead of legendary. Around them, Moon Hall remained frozen in tense silence. The glowing silver patterns still circled their feet, while whispers spread nervously among the gathered wolves. Nobody understood exactly what they were witnessing anymore. A rejected Omega had somehow become the center of an ancient prophecy in less than an hour. Derek looked furious. Worse than furious. Afraid. Elena saw it clearly now beneath his expression. He was losing control of the room. Losing status. Losing certainty. This changes nothing, Derek said sharply, forcing confidence back into his voice. You cannot rewrite pack law because of emotions and old myths. Lucian slowly turned his head toward him. The warmth vanished from his face instantly. Pack law, he repeated softly. Derek lifted his chin stubbornly. A rejected mating bond is final. Correct, Lucian replied calmly. Which means Elena Hartwell is free from any obligation to you. Several wolves nodded carefully at that. Derek's jaw tightened harder. She still belongs to this territory. The moment the words left his mouth, the temperature in the hall seemed to drop. Lucian's silver eyes darkened with something cold enough to silence the entire room again. Elena felt it too. The king's wolf rising beneath the surface. Dangerous. Ancient. Protective. Belongs. Lucian asked quietly. Derek hesitated. For the first time all night, uncertainty flickered openly across his face. Lucian took one slow step forward. Tell me, Derek Voss, did Elena belong to this territory when your wolves mocked her? Another step. Did she belong here when wine was poured over her mother's dress? Another. Did she belong here while your pack taught her that kindness deserved humiliation? Derek backed away instinctively. Nobody moved to defend him. Nobody dared interrupt. Lucian stopped directly in front of him now, calm and terrifying beneath the moonlight. You only speak of ownership now because another wolf recognized her worth before you did. Shame spread visibly across several faces in the crowd. Elena felt emotion tighten painfully in her throat. For years she had stood invisible inside this pack. Now suddenly every cruel moment was being dragged into the light where no one could pretend not to see it anymore. Clara, the young servant Elena had helped earlier, quietly stepped forward from the edge of the hall. Her injured hand looked completely healed now. She stayed with me for 3 hours last winter when my little brother was sick, Clara whispered shakily into the silence. Heads turned toward her immediately. Clara swallowed hard, but kept speaking. Nobody else came because he was only a servant child. More silence. Another Omega near the back lifted her head slowly. Elena repaired my grandmother's coat after the snowstorms, she admitted softly. She refused payment. A stable worker cleared his throat nervously. She brought food to my father when he broke his leg during harvest season. One voice became another. Then another. Quiet stories filled Moon Hall one after another while Elena stood frozen in shock. Tiny moments she barely remembered. Small kindnesses she never considered important. Wolves she thought had forgotten. Derek looked increasingly uncomfortable with every word. Lucien glanced back toward Elena softly. "Do you see it now?" he asked quietly. Tears burned behind her eyes again. "See what?" His expression gentled. The difference between being unnoticed and being unimportant. The words shattered something inside her completely. Because all these years, Elena had believed they meant the same thing. Elder Marcus slowly lowered himself onto one knee before her. Gasps rippled through the hall instantly. "Forgive us," the old wolf whispered heavily. "We failed you." Elena stared at him in complete disbelief. An elder had never apologized to her before. Others began lowering their heads too, one by one. Wolves who once ignored her. Wolves who laughed during her rejection. Wolves who now suddenly looked ashamed. Derek stood alone near the altar now, isolated by the shifting loyalty of his own pack. Lucien returned to Elena's side quietly. He did not pressure her, did not touch her. He simply stood beside her like a wall against the entire world. "You do not owe anyone forgiveness tonight," he said softly. Elena looked around the hall at all the bowed heads, the silver moonlight, the shattered certainty in every familiar face. Then slowly, for the first time in years, she lifted her chin instead of lowering it. The glowing patterns beneath her feet blazed brighter instantly. Somewhere high above the hall, the massive stained glass windows trembled softly as moonlight poured through them in radiant silver streams. Elder Marcus looked upward with tears in his eyes. "The moon has accepted her," he whispered. And for the very first time in her life, nobody in the room dared look down on Elena Hartwell again. Moonlight flooded Moon Hall so brightly now that the silver chandeliers overhead looked dim beside it. Elena stood at the center of the glowing marble floor with Lucien beside her while the entire pack remained silent around them. No laughter remained. No whispers of weakness. The same wolves who once looked through her now lowered their eyes with respect she had never asked for. Elena's chest ached beneath the weight of it all. Hours ago she had entered this ceremony, praying not to embarrass herself. Now ancient symbols burned beneath her feet, while the king of all alphas stood at her side like he belonged there. Nothing about tonight felt real anymore. Lucien watched her carefully, as though sensing how overwhelmed she was becoming. "You can still walk away," he said quietly. The words startled several wolves nearby. Elena turned toward him slowly. "What?" His expression remained calm beneath the silver light. No bond should begin with fear or obligation. His gaze held her steadily. Not even one written. By the moon itself. The hall grew impossibly still. Elena realized then that Lucien meant every word. He was not trying to possess her, not forcing destiny onto her shoulders. He was offering her something she had never truly been given before. Choice. Derek stared in disbelief. "You would let her refuse you?" Lucien finally looked toward him again. "Of course." The answer came instantly. Strength without freedom is not loyalty. It is control. Derek looked as though he had no idea how to answer that. Elena felt emotion tighten painfully in her throat again. Nobody had ever asked what she wanted before. Wolves decided things around her constantly. Where she belonged, what she lacked, how little value she carried. Even tonight, before Lucien arrived, her future had been publicly discarded without anyone asking how deeply it would wound her. But now the most powerful wolf alive stood before her patiently waiting for her answer. Elder Marcus slowly rose from his kneeling position, tears still shining in his old eyes. "The Moonborn queens of old were said to guide kings away from darkness," he said softly into the silence. "Perhaps that is why the throne called for her return." Lucien's expression shifted almost invisibly at those words. Elena noticed immediately. "Darkness?" she asked quietly. For the first time all night, Lucien hesitated. The room noticed it too. "Power isolates," he admitted softly after a moment. "Over time, kings stop hearing honesty. People fear them too much." His silver eyes remained fixed on her. "You looked at frightened servants tonight before you looked at yourself. That matters more than you realize." Elena's heart tightened painfully. She thought of Clara, the stable worker's father. Elderly wolves she quietly helped through winter storms. She had never considered any of those moments important. Yet somehow Lucian saw them as proof of strength instead of weakness. "I am not a queen," she whispered uncertainly. Lucian stepped closer, moonlight catching the silver threads along his dark coat. "No," he agreed quietly. "You are Elena Hartwell." The way he said her name made it sound valuable, precious, real, and that is enough for me. Tears finally escaped down Elena's cheeks openly. She was too exhausted to hide them anymore. Lucian did not seem uncomfortable with her tears. He simply waited beside her with impossible patience while the entire hall watched. Somewhere near the back of the room, Clara smiled through her own tears. Other wolves looked emotional too now, even ashamed, because they all understood the truth at the same time. Elena had never changed tonight. Their vision of her had. The silver moon symbols beneath Elena's feet began glowing softer now, calmer somehow, as though waiting with the rest of the room. Lucian slowly extended his hand toward her one final time. "Elena," he said quietly, "you spent years shrinking yourself so others would feel comfortable standing taller." His voice lowered gently. "Please do not do that anymore." Her breath shook painfully. For so long she had believed survival meant becoming smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. Yet standing here beneath the moonlight, surrounded by wolves finally seeing her clearly, Elena realized how tired she was of apologizing for existing. Slowly, she lifted her head fully. Then she placed her hand in Lucian's. Warmth spread instantly through her chest the moment their skin touched. Not burning, not overwhelming, peaceful. The silver markings across the marble floor blazed brilliantly one final time, illuminating the entire hall in radiant moonlight. Gasps echoed throughout the room as glowing symbols briefly appeared around both Elena's wrist and Lucian's hand before fading like starlight at dawn. Elder Marcus bowed his head deeply. "The bond is accepted," he whispered emotionally. Lucian's fingers closed carefully around Elena's hand, firm enough to steady her, but gentle enough to let her pull away whenever she wished. She did not pull away. Outside the towering stained glass windows, clouds drifted apart slowly to reveal a massive full moon hanging over the kingdom like a blessing. Lucian glanced down at her with that same impossible softness in his silver eyes. "Ready to leave this place behind?" he asked quietly. Elena looked around Moon Hall one last time. The humiliation, the loneliness, the years spent, believing she was forgettable. Then she looked back at the king standing beside her, not above her. Beside her, for the first time in her life, Elena smiled without fear. "Yes," she whispered softly. And together, beneath the silver glow of the rising moon, they walked forward while the entire hall stepped aside to let the future queen pass.